So earlier today, we were going back and forth in the court, and one of the people that came up was a character that we covered here on the channel recently from Fate Strange Fate, that being the master of Heracles in the series, Bosdelot Cordelion. Now, in one of the recent videos that I made covering him and Herc, I did the beginning of Herc's summoning. It was sort of a primer to his character, but essentially Boz is a pretty cold-blooded magus that serves under the Mafia, which is a really different angle from what we're used to. And one of the things that came up about him, and also something that was mentioned in the video that I did on him, was the way that his character acts and how it's very reminiscent to a couple of characters that we know already, 3 of them to be exact. The way that you see Boz carry himself is a lot like the author took Kiritsugu, Kirei, and Kuzuki and combined them all into one character. I kid you not. And if you look into it, if you read Strange Fate, you already know exactly what I mean. Boz has this really good charm to his character. He has the callousness of Kirei, he has the calculations of Kiritsugu, while also having this gut reflex of Kuzuki. And one joke that I made about him was that even though he has some striking similarities between those characters, I really feel like he has more personality than all 3 of those characters combined. And they agreed. And what I mean by it is this, and I understand that that's the way that their characters are set up. They're meant to be pretty soulless characters and have the other qualities about them push the character forward. But even while doing that, if you see the relationship between Boz and Herc, it's a really interesting one. And I don't know if it's just the way that Narita, the author of Strange Fate, the way that he writes, but it feels like he still maintains the aspect of keeping you super engaged with each and every interaction that he has in the way that those characters couldn't. Every time him and Herc have a conversation, it's really insightful on both sides. It's not like the 3 characters that I mentioned where you kind of know where things are gonna go, because for one, Herc can actually talk now, so he's actually going to express himself and give some bite back if he hears things that he doesn't abide by. And having such a heavy eye on Boz's character, immediately there's several scenes that come to mind when I think about, you know, them sort of showing that friction between each other, but also revealing parts of Boz that really surprise you and show you who he is as a person. For example, there's this specific flashback when he was talking to Herc about Jason. The story actually pulls Boz into Heracles' flashback, because you know that's something that's bound to happen. If you contract with a servant, you get to view into their memories. So he's looking at the Argonauts and he's seeing Atalanta, he saw Medea, a bunch of other people that were there, and then he saw Herc communicating with Jason. And he's really taking into account the things that Jason is saying and the way that he carries himself as a person. And the more that he hears about it, he thinks about his own life back in the Mafia, and he's like, man, this dude is a straight up buster. Like, he wouldn't last a day where I'm from. So when he comes out of the flashback and he later brings this up to Heracles, and he was trying to understand what really makes you respect that guy so much when you essentially look down to him, not just in power, but it looks like mentally as well. And you know, the story also goes into that as well. Jason was able to give Heracles a chance and actually view him as a person and not this thing, when nobody else around him would give him that courtesy. Very similar to the way that he's doing Herc right now, funny enough. So for that, he forever feels indebted to him. But Boz is asking him, what's the big deal about this dude? I don't get it. Somebody like that, especially arrogant and as careless as he is, we'd have that dude rolled up and smoked by the next morning. And you can really tell that Herc took this to heart, because he took a step back and he stopped and he was like, okay, here's the thing. You can say whatever you want about me. I don't care. It really doesn't make me no difference. But if you ever disrespect Jason like that again without actually knowing him like I do, I will cut your throat. And it was so funny because as Boz may come off being this super tough guy that works for the Mafia, Mafia, when he heard Herc say this, he said, fine, I don't really care about that dude anyway. I was just curious. But you can see that even for the way that he is, he's not stupid. Like, he's not crossing that line with Herc because he knows that he's not playing. And it's just different little moments like that. You know, this is something that I haven't really gotten to yet because I just rolled out his character. There's a lot of things to explain. But even the fact that in the story of Strange Fate, by association with the Mafia, he actually gained access to that same machine that Atrum made. If you guys aren't aware, Atrum had a machine in Fate Stay Night where he was converting people into magical energy. But you know, Medea wasn't fond of him, so she ended up taking him out. Well, that machine ended up in the hands of the Mafia, and they used their resources to further its research and make even more alterations to it. So by the time the story comes around, they had already converted nearly 25,000 people into energy crystals just for the sake of the war, or just in case they would need it. And Boz was feeding these to Heracles. He was like, bro, I got enough magical energy to last you for months, and I can get more. And that's why essentially, beyond the way that Herc is already, he can pretty much do whatever he wants because he's feeding him these monocrystals that ultimately make his energy unlimited. I mean, the war is only supposed to last a few weeks, and the place that the crystals were coming from had a sick and twisted angle to it that I personally really don't associate with Boz's character. The dude has said straight up, and this is the reason why he asked Heracles would he be able to take out a child, because these crystals come from a mass amount of children being sacrificed to be the energy for Herc. The very nature of where Herc is getting this energy from is from these children that have been thrown to the dam. It completely goes against his character. So it juggles this sense of morality and character consistency that Herc would never tread upon if he was in his normal state. But since he's Alcides and he's completely going against his regular state of mind, until he regains respect on his original name, he himself is spitting in the face of that to get the job done. But again, I've never looked at Boz as an evil person for using those crystals. And I'm usually, if I see something that's irredeemable in the story, I would be the first person to call it out. But the way that Narita weaves it together, it doesn't really feel like you can shoulder the blame on him. It's a lot like war, right? When people think about things like war, they only think about it from their side. It's a very linear aspect. So when you talk about a hero, you only speak about the heroes of your side. Not once would you take a step back and think, hey, maybe you're the evil ones. Maybe you're the ones taking from this child somewhere, wherever. It really doesn't matter. War is war. It's always been the same thing. So when we commend these guys that lead for us in our countries, you know, there's a other angle to it where they're not so great, and you know, you build up these characters from another place that you fought up against as somebody that's revolting and only had their self-best interest. You completely leave out the fact that you were doing the exact same thing. That's exactly how I look at this situation with Boz. It's not him being evil, it's just what it is. It's just a part of being the Mafia. That's just the way it works. You know it's about to be underhanded. You know how they're moving. You know where these people come from. I would be more surprised if these were qualities of somebody that I didn't expect. You expect this. You know, I just find things like that funny. That's why I can never really champion any of these people. Then you have situations like when Boz's boss passed away mid-story, if you guys weren't aware about that. And that's something we've covered on the channel too. Galvaroso was killed off by Strange Fake Hassan of the Fathomless Rift. And the moment that this happened, you know, you see Boz come in and he doesn't say a word. Everybody's asking him what's going on. And he pulls out this huge grand piano out the closet and he just picks up the whole thing by hand and carries it into the freezer. Doesn't say a word to any of his subordinates. And he plays a piece for Galvaroso passing away. This cold-hearted dude. He brought the piano into the freezer, shut it closed. So this guy is in this frigid temperature playing Mozart. He's playing Mozart's Requiem piece as homage to his boss. It's just really refreshing to see for how closed off he is for majority of the story. A lot like Kiritsugu, Kirei, and Kuzuki. Kuzuki. It just felt like a really nice touch. And he didn't stop until the piece was finished. He didn't stop, he didn't break. The whole scene was devoted to him giving him that moment. And that's something that you don't really see from those characters too often. The way that Urobuchi frames things, it's very rare that he gives that type of intent with the characters. And even with Kuzuki, his background was very vague. It takes a very long time up until the point where we get into Ataraxia for you to really see him open up in any capacity, and that was only with the help of Medea being around. Then you get to see some of that, and he still stays as this super stoic, unmoving person, Medea kind of carrying majority of their conversations, because in his mind he's always been focused on the goal. So as far as having any type of insightful conversation go, it's a lot less coming from his side because he's so narrowly focused. The same thing with Kiritsugu. When you see Kiritsugu interact with people, it's from the mind state of Kiritsugu and nobody else. He doesn't care what nobody else thinks. Kirei is the same way. People think the reason that Gilgamesh and Kirei works is because Kirei is just infatuated with Gilgamesh. I hardly recall Kirei having any type of fascination with Gilgamesh's background whatsoever, other than the conversations that focused on him, that focused on Kirei. That's why Kirei was so interested in Gil, is because all those conversations that Gil had with him circled back around to how he felt about himself. Their relationship came from a really selfish angle, and the way that he viewed Gilgamesh, I feel like he knew better than to pry, so he never did. But even still, you usually know exactly how those conversations are gonna go down because, well, like I said, he's not gonna pry. He's not gonna play with Gilgamesh because he knows Gilgamesh is gonna kill him. And he said that he knows that Gilgamesh will kill him if he says the wrong thing or he says it in the wrong way. So he kept his approach to what Gilgamesh enjoyed, you know, him being the jester and all, which is the unfolding of Kirei's character. And he kept it strictly to that. But by doing so, from a writing standpoint, and you can say the same thing about all three characters, I feel like that holds them back in personality because a lot of times you know exactly how things are gonna go. You know exactly what they're gonna say because they're designed to be this way. And that's what's so refreshing about Boz, is that Narita was able to pull off having that same pedigree, that same nature of these characters, while still having that back and forth between whoever he's talking to, whether that be Faldeus or Heracles, or even when people speak about him. You know, there's only so much that we learn about Kirei, Kiritsugu, and Kuzuki because from the way that they're portrayed, their lives, their backstories, they're very secretive people. All three of them pretty much being mercenaries, most people don't really know much about them. So if you do learn anything about them, it's from the perspective of the narrator. The narrator is telling you, hey, this happened to Kiritsugu in his background, the whole village was overrun, and maybe it's telling you from Kiritsugu's perspective, but nobody but his own. It's always singular. Or the same way that Kuzuki came up and how he ended up taking out his own master after his village was overrun and he learned his secret techniques in fighting. Same thing. And the reason that I bring this perspective up, because there are people to shed light on Boz's background in a very compassionate way that those characters didn't have. His subordinates, they also know a lot about him. You know, they were talking about things like how they heard stories of where he's came from, and one that stuck out for me was that how he's went up against so many mages, and pretty much everybody he went up against ended up getting clapped except Kirei, the master of Mordred, the same guy from Apocrypha, or El Malloy. He was one of the only people that's been able to hang with Boz and live to tell the tale, which is not only a huge drop for Kirei, but his character as well, because for how great that they showcase him to be, you know, how skilled, how experienced, they also show you that he's not unbeatable, that he can be thwarted, and gives you a certain level of vulnerability that a character usually wouldn't have had somebody like his subordinates not been there to express it. Another thing that stuck out is that, you know, Boz being in the mafia or living the type of lifestyle that he's lived, he's got into it with a lot of people, a lot of mages, and one of the mages that he got into it with actually actually sent him back the head of his own girlfriend. I'm like, yo, what? It's like, first of all, it's hard to believe that Boz even has a girlfriend, you know, living the life that he lives beyond it being political. You would just expect that. But the way that the story frames it, this was really his girl, and the dude sent Boz her head. So when Boz finally got a hold of the dude, he put him in a blender. They said that it was one of the worst ways that you could get rid of a person, that it really couldn't even be described. So the same way he showed compassion for his boss, you know, he also is a person as well. I'm not looking at it like some people would look at Sakura. It's like, oh, he's using these crystals, that means he's also a mass whatever. It's like, you can't look at it like that. It just completely rips out the context and lacks the nuance. It's like you're ignoring the story altogether. And I really like the back and forth, the discourse that him and Herc have. I feel like they make really great moments, whether they be by themselves or kicking it with each other. It's never a dull moment. But that's just Strange Fake in general. The writing is just super detailed, super authentic, and it always keeps you on the edge of your seat even when nothing is happening, which is not an easy thing to do. I've seen a lot of people drop certain Fate series simply because they were bored, and Fate is crazy action packed. But if you have, I don't want to say dull angles, but you have these angles where you giving these characters in a way where they can be expressed in a way better manner, of course people are gonna jump ship. But realistically, a lot of those people are gonna jump ship anyway, because let's face it, most people, if there's no action going on, they're not gonna watch it. Some guys are just like that.